Hi, I'm Steve Clemons, and I have a question. What is the dangerous and murky deep state that President Trump keeps talking about? Let's get to the bottom line. When you hear the term deep state, what image does it conjure up? Is it a secret illuminati that controls everything around us? So who are they? President Donald Trump has been claiming that there's a vast deep state conspiracy against him for years now, like when he said this last month in Kentucky.
We are finally putting America first. Yet the deep state and the failed ruling class are trying to resist any changes to their failed policies of the past. They believe it is their right to rule over you and to redistribute your wealth all around the world. No, thank you. No, thank you. That's why we ended the Paris Accord.
So in Donald Trump's mind, what is the deep state? Is it the, quote, failed ruling class, or the so-called corrupt Democrat politicians, or the civil servants and diplomats who privately find him distasteful? Fortunately, we have three people in the room who have all the answers to these questions. Elaine Kamarck, senior editor of Brookings Institution blog FixGov, and author of Why Presidents Fail and How They Can Succeed Again. Great book. Republican strategist and former USAID official Adolfo Franco. Thanks for being here, Adolfo. And former communications director for the Democratic National Committee, John Neffinger. Thank you all very much for being here. We could start this from lots of different directions. But Adolfo, I'm going to start with you.
Oh.
You support these folks in the White House. So what is this deep state conspiracy as you see it inside the U.S. government determined to undermine the president?
Well, I don't think it's anything new. And I think maybe a new term and a new coined phrase when you say deep state, but I think every president and every administration at different levels have complained about
I didn't hear Barack Obama coming out and say, hey, the deep state,
well, I'll get to that if you want me to jump to that very quickly.
No, I just want, but you made an interesting point.
But I'm just saying is, but Barack Obama did complain about leaks. Every president has complained at some degree about the bureaucracy and people undermining the administration's priority, be they Democrat or Republican. But you raised a good point when you said President Obama, if I could quickly, is I think as a general proposition, I've been around Washington 40 years, including part of the deep state, because I was in the civil service at some point. I think the vast majority of individuals in the federal bureaucracy, first of all, have a point of view, and it tends not to be Republican, except for the Pentagon and Defense and so forth. And I also think that they become invested in their parochial interests of those agencies, particularly the regulatory agencies. So they put those priorities first over those of an administration. The problem for Republicans has been the following. Generally speaking, when Republicans win, they are seen as a conquering army coming in to vanquish the civil service. And I think when Democrats win, civil service see this as a liberation army coming in to say, let the thousand flowers bloom and you do what you will. And therein is the difference, which I think has been reflected in the polls that were taken prior to Donald Trump's election, where over a quarter of the civil servants said that they would consider resigning their position if he were elected president, and 74% would support Hillary Clinton. That's the bias that exists, and it's just a reality.
When Ronald Reagan was president, I remember Reagan, James Baker, people around that world, that were secretaries, they expanded their bureaucracies. They expanded the number of people working in government. It grew demand. So I remember a Republican presidency in which the so-called deep state actually flourished. Elaine, do you remember that? Yeah, I want to say, did you remember that time? But I remember that time. But I mean, you've spent a lot of time writing about the deep state, what it is and isn't. So what is, as you look at the dashboard of what matters in talking about this term, how do you see it?
Well, the actual term is very, very dangerous, and it is a great disservice to use this term in regard to the United States government. And the reason is that the deep state, the origin of the term is Turkish, and it is meant to imply a secret government, civil servants, that go against the law, not in favor of the law. What you have to understand about the American bureaucracy, whether they're Democrats or Republicans, is they act according to the law. And let me give you a perfect example. What if tomorrow President Trump decided to pay a visit to the Agriculture Department? Okay, so he'd walk in and everybody would want a selfie with him and it would be all great and exciting. And then what if he said to these bureaucrats, guess what, I think dairy price supports are a terrible policy. Okay? Now, what would happen? Would they go back to their offices and stop the payments to dairy farmers?
Well, we know what would happen
No,
is that
they would not.
The OMB and Mick Mulvaney, the acting chief of staff, actually would engineer the move to begin finding ways to stop price supports. We know that because we've seen this right now in California fires.
No, they would begin the process of changing the law.
Right.
They would not on their own change the law. And that's what's so different
to this, right?
Well, no, I think that what you have now is if he did try to do it, you would have the courts intervening. There is no deep state in the United States of America. There's a bureaucracy that frustrates presidents. I was in the White House. I know that every other day we wanted to get to yes, and there was some reason to get to no.
this point,
but the reason is law. It is not
right.
law.
To this point that Adolfo raised, that about so many government officials and bureaucrats preferring Hillary Clinton over Donald Trump, 3-1. John, you were a spokesman for the DNC, and so many of these people are your friends that are. So are they lying in wait to subvert the interests of the President of the United States today? Are your friends, people Democrats in Republican clothing, hiding within the infrastructure of the government? How do you see this?
First of all, I think your point is very well taken, that there are people who are government professionals. Maybe they're in it for the pension, but they're not in it for their political interests. And then there is a code by which that's not to say they're always perfect, for sure.
Right.
But we need those people, right? We elect people to steer the ship of state, but there's got to be a ship. And so those are the, I don't know, crewmen, whatever. Don't go too far with that analogy. So we need those folks. And what's interesting to me about this moment in history is to see who is doing what. So Mulvaney he's part of the conquering army. And so what we actually
to remind our public, Mick Mulvaney is the acting chief of staff, also the head of the Office of Management and Budget.
Correct. He's got a couple of hats. He reports directly to Donald Trump. And not to get too much into the news of the day, but it seems like he actually did hold up some payments, possibly in violation of something called the Impoundment Control Act of 1974. Right. So he may have, to take your Ag Department analogy, actually just gone and did it. But that's because he's not one of the sort of permanent state.
The reason we're in impeachment right now is because a not insignificant number of members of Congress think that he and at the president's orders violated the law.
So Adolfo, I see. Adolfo's getting redder and redder.
Yeah, I know they don't want to talk about the deep state. They want to talk about impeachment. But here's the reality.
But I mean, a lot of people have connected deep state to impeachment.
Yeah,
so
and I will in this way as well. I've been around whistleblowers. I've been around IGs for years. In my opinion, the so-called whistleblower, if you want to talk to the impeachment, is part of a cabal, in my opinion. And the way it was, the way this complaint was written and the way the things typically go to a hotline, it suggests to me that a lawyer and a number of other people, potentially even members of the Democratic staff of the Intelligence Committee, were involved in it. That's a suspicion people have. But I'm going to put that aside for a moment as we're talking. Yes, as we're talking about a broader issue, which is the so-called deep state. This is a romantic notion my colleagues have, that somehow people come in and they just follow the law. No, they don't. They have an agenda. They have a political point of view. There's no coincidence that all the bedroom communities of the Washington, D.C. area are heavily Democratic, and those are the people that are by and large working in the government. They have a point of view, they're quite informed, and they have an agenda. Now, you might say, Elaine, that they're just simply, the presidents are frustrated. I think Democratic presidents are less frustrated. When you ran a program, Reinventing Government, that I was involved in, you had about 2,000 people from the bureaucracy involved in it. You were promoting the bureaucracy. Democrats promote the bureaucracy. Every congressman, every senator in the metropolitan Washington, D.C. area is an advocate for this federal bureaucracy. Since you brought up President Reagan, he said government is the problem, not the solution. President Reagan was the one that said very clearly there's something bigger than the presidency, the judiciary, and the Congress. It's the federal bureaucrats, and they don't have your interest in mind.
So let's get at that.
That is just nonsense.
It is true.
That's just nonsense.
Elaine.
Let's look at it this way. For all these years of Republican presidents, they always come in and complain about the bureaucracy. Bureaucracy is big. You know why the bureaucracy is big?
Because you can't fire people.
No, because we have laws that mandate big programs. What the Republicans have failed to do is they can't cut the government. They have not been able to cut back years of Social Security. They can't cut back Medicare. They can't get rid of Obamacare. The Republicans fail to roll back the essence of big government.
You know what,
if you have a big government, you need a lot of people.
Let me respond to that very quickly. If we had 2/3 of the Senate, if you had a majority in the House, which we've never had a veto-proof or I should say filibuster-proof Senate, we will get those things done. President Trump was advocating the abolition of the Office of Personnel Management. He was advocating for a reduction of salaries and reduction of personnel outside of defense. The problem is, in a divided government, our system is divided. That is extremely difficult to have.
So let me show this. Let me show this tweet. Elaine, let me show this tweet.
Why do you never have 2/3 of the Senate? Because when your guys run on cutting Social Security or Medicare,
you're not running on.
Okay, so let me run a tweet here from the president for a minute. He says, tonight we forcefully condemn the blatant corruption of the Democrat Party, the fake news media, and the rogue bureaucrats of the deep state. The only message these radicals will understand is a crushing defeat on November 3rd, 2020. John, I'm going to come to you for a minute,
sure,
or maybe more than a minute, and ask you, because I think it's a fascinating conversation, and I think you both feel what you're feeling very passionately. The question is, this is a campaign slogan. This is a campaign feeling. This is one wonders, Adolfo, if you were able to overcome what Elaine was saying, what you've been able to do, and kind of get this so you had a more responsive bureaucracy at the time that was still public interested. Whether or not, but it seems to me that Donald Trump, John, seems to want this issue.
Absolutely.
So
he needs a
why does it
resonate?
resonate?
I mean, he's getting a lot of his way in Washington right now because Congress isn't functioning and he owns the executive branch. And as we've seen, he's willing to take even some liberties with it. But he needs to be the underdog. They need to be fighting against, he needs to be fighting for the American people against some shadowy powers, which is why we get this sort of deep state rhetoric, even though we met the deep state. Alexander Vindman is a deep state. He is a combat veteran with
Elaine
Purple
would call
Heart.
him the standing state.
Right. Okay, sorry.
Or the steady state.
Sorry,
The
that's
steady
right.
state.
Steady standing state.
The permanent state.
But he's not Mick Mulvaney, who came in, to your point, as the conquering army. When he heard that phone call, he went sprinting for the counsel's office to blow the whistle, unlike Morrison, who went sprinting to say, hide that, right? So that's who it is that we're talking about. Somebody who has devoted his life to public service, has an agenda, has a point of view, for sure.
Well, I'm glad you said that, John.
Yeah.
People who have an agenda, a different point of view,
but the agenda
and disagree with the president's policies.
The agenda is the one that we all pledge allegiance to.
Policies. These individuals are not charged with implementing their own policy. And in these hearings, they kept using the word.
That's nuts.
It isn't nuts,
People are
Elaine.
implementing the law,
They're not
their own policy.
No, but I mean, the question
is the law.
Well, let's take an example that's not part of today. Does there become a gap between the law as written, the law as purposed, and the law as executed?
Frankly, I think that's setting up the wrong question, with all due respect to our host. This isn't about the law. This is about policy. And this is about individuals that are vested in their agencies, vested in their political partisan points of view, that are seeking policy. The best example, and I want to get into the impeachment, is Ukraine was about foreign policy of the United States. They kept repeating the words irregular. Not illegal, irregular. President Trump can decide whatever policy he wants. The chainsaw is that the bureaucrats who think they know better and are going to either write out the administration. I found that at USAID. I found it in the government of the 1990s. Frustrate the intended policies of the administration.
So let me ask you, John, let me ask you a question.
They actually know better,
but
because
that's not their prerogative.
No. There is a fuzzy line, but there is law. There is actual law that has been broken in this case.
Let me ask you a question about Afghanistan.
Absolutely arguing the law.
Let's look at a different foreign policy issue.
There is a law.
That's when they run to the counsel's office and say, look, this happened. It seems illegal. Am I right?
Hold a second. Let's change the game here for a second. I want to discuss the Afghanistan papers that have recently been leaked. A comparison to the Pentagon Papers and looking at this issue, which I find fascinating because President Obama and President Trump have both struggled mightily with Afghanistan. Both of them wanted to have less of an American footprint. The military bureaucracy, the national security class, what might be termed as a deep state by some, resisted presidential direction under Obama and clearly under Donald Trump many times to do this. And so in these national security cases, Adolfo, I would ask you among your colleagues, was that an okay case where Jack Keane or other generals could essentially lie and deceive about performance, feeding that into the President of the United States?
Absolutely it's not okay. And you'd think my instincts, because I would be supporting, generally speaking, the Pentagon and the defense is more simpatico with conservative and Republican points of view. And I'd have great admiration for a lot of these people that have been involved. They're wrong. But they're equally wrong when it's EPA and when it's the State Department or anything else. And that is the point, whether they're either manipulating data or they're frustrating directive from the president. In the case, to answer the question, that is wrong. That is an example of the deep state, to use that term, whether it's originally Turkish or otherwise. It's a coined term.
Steady state.
But that is an example of what we need to correct across the government, not just the
John,
the
when
Pentagon.
you talk with the politicians that I know across the field, running for office as they prepare for 2020, the Democrats.
Yes.
I'm interested in how this is resonating with them. I mean, are they put in a position where they feel they need to bond with the civil service, bond with those servants of the state, and by essentially the political act of the flamboyant criticisms that the president has been offering, do they then fall into the trap of becoming natural allies and saying, yes, those people are ours?
I mean, I guess if you're running for Congress around Maryland and Virginia, where those are your actual constituents, then you certainly do. I think there is a broader thing, though. I work with a lot of first-time candidates. And so it's important to appreciate what the steady or standing state is doing for folks who come into Washington and don't know where the restroom is, right? And just know nothing about how Washington works. It's really important to have those people there. And so we need some form of whatever it is. I think, they do have some incentives that aren't always aligned with other folks. So you got to monitor them, but you need them both. So that's important to understand. But it's a separate and necessary political class from the electors.
I think all of us go to universities and we talk to a next generation of folks that are interested in public service and serving. I think, Elaine, I know you teach, and John and Adolfo, you do this, I do as well. And I find an anxiety among young people, both parties, on whether this is a smart career move, whether going in and serving at this point, becoming a young foreign service officer or joining OMB or something, and ends up being something. And so when you look at the ranks of government, we're not hiring. Or maybe we can't, there's a big jobs, jobs gap in there. So Adolfo, let me start with you. If you're a young person, you're going to advise young people on going into government today, would you advise them to take this route, given the bashing that so many people have taken in these roles?
I would. I did it myself. And the reason I think it's important, I had a stereotype of what government was, and it was actually confirmed. And that is just what I described. I was in a bureaucracy fighting people who were not taking the directives of the president, and I served.
You're fighting your USAID
and before, when I was in the civil service, I saw the directives of then the first President Bush being frustrated firsthand. I just saw that firsthand. So I'm sorry, this is a good example of it. I would say to people, yes, go into government. There are many people in government quite dedicated and talented, and they are necessary. I'm not bashing the federal bureaucrats, or I was part of that. There's a lot of that. But and I think you've recognized some of it, to suggest that there isn't a bias here, and it is not a Republican bias.
Let's stop there just a minute. There's a bias. So
it is a Democratic bias in the bureaucracy.
I understand, but I want to ask you this question here. Adolfo, hundreds of former USAID employees also signed a letter about President Trump, said they're distraught at the dangers inherent in the president's cavalier and quite possibly corrupt approach, very strong language, to making foreign policy on impulse and personal interest rather than in response to national security concerns. So I want to just stop here because you talked about bias. I get that, and I understand. When you see a letter like this is unusual. This is not normal. Does this not represent a red flag that someone ought to take a look, or just should all of these things, from your perspective, be ignored?
I think something that I learned a long time ago in the White House was this: when you get a letter like this, that means we're doing the right thing. And the right thing means this: we're setting the right policies. And what you're doing is, to quote the president, is you have the swamp fighting back.
But did your boss get that letter? Bush 1 and Bush 2 didn't get that letter.
But no other president
they were part of the
Adolfo
this
just said something
letter.
important. I want Elaine to respond.
John,
John
and Adolfo,
but I think
no
it's
other
important.
president has gotten this
No
letter.
other president has
this
come in
letter,
to make the kind of reforms that
No.
President
But your
Trump
point
wants.
is that this is working for President Trump.
This is
Adolfo, this is working
not
for President Trump.
right.
It is.
Yeah.
It is working for,
Rhetorically.
and it is President Trump's agenda. President Trump ran in 2016 to say he was going to what? To the swamp, drain it. And this is part of the draining process.
These are the
No,
swamp
it
bills.
You're part of
So
the
Elaine,
Republican.
you wrote,
No, it
Elaine,
is not.
Elaine
No, it
wrote
is
in a
not.
kicker of a wonderful piece that I recommend people take a look. You know, Google Elaine Kmark and Deep State, and you'll find a fascinating article. But you wrote in the end, you said, you know, adherence to law is what differentiates the deep state from the steady state. And you say we should deep six the deep state. But in this, you imply that deep state is of those people that would violate law are there in the system. So can you just give me just a short take on your concerns about the deep state, which
Yes.
I know you'd like to get away from that term, but you recognize it in your article.
My concern about the deep state is that the President of the United States is undermining one of the very strengths of the American political system. If you show me a country where the bureaucrats routinely ignore the rule of law, I will show you one of those countries that the president so graciously talked about.
We'll talk about
That's
policy.
what they do in those countries. In our country, by and large, right, the bureaucrats, no matter their personal biases, the bureaucrats basically follow the rule of law, and when they don't, they
Right.
get in trouble.
She avoids the key word here. Nobody, because of whatever it is, policy. Are they
No.
following? Are
No.
they
You
following and
are
implementing the
wrong on
policy
that.
directive? Is the president of the United States, be it Donald Trump or Barack Obama, entitled
No,
to set
he
policies?
is not. He is not. No,
So
because he is not king.
Policy?
Because he has to change law.
The president can't have his
Policy
own
has to
foreign
change
policy.
law.
The president, of
Yes,
course, the
wait a
president
minute.
can.
Wait a
So,
minute.
folks, we're right now in the
This is
final
but
stretch here.
Of
So I'm going to
course
ask each of you.
The president
Yeah,
is
Adolfo.
entitled
There is
to
a
implement his
line.
policies.
There is a
I got it.
Entitled to policy.
I'm going to give you each 30
to
seconds
change law.
to issue your final piece on this. Adolfo, just 30 seconds each of you, how do you get the equilibrium between a president, a White House wrestling with the bureaucracy to do what he or she wants and working constructively in that process versus demeaning them in that process? I want to ask each of you that. How do you get the balance right from your perspective?
Well, first of all, since I've been around for a long time, and I came in the Reagan administration, President Reagan did, at a different time, fundamentally what Donald Trump is doing. President Reagan fired the air traffic controllers outright. That was a big scandal. President Reagan called the bureaucrats a problem. President Reagan said the most frightening words in English were, I'm from the government and I'm here to help. So I don't think those were particularly flowery or supportive things. And Donald Devine, his director of OMB, very clearly said it.
Right.
These individuals are there to promote their parochial interests and their policies. They conveniently want to talk about the law. Let's talk about whether they're implementing President Trump's policies. They're frustrating them.
Right, got it. John Eppinger.
So I think it's true that folks in the government have their parochial interests, their professional interests, right? They're having a paycheck and they're having a professional situation and they're interested in that stuff for sure. And they do have policy preferences for sure. But there is above that, there is an allegiance we all swear and there is a law. Mm-hmm. And that's the problem here. It's not that Donald Trump has different policy preferences. We expected those from a Republican president. The problem is we're running up against the law. And we're seeing not only Democrat lifetime bureaucrats leave, we're seeing John Bolton leave. We're seeing Dan Coates leave.
Yeah,
we're seeing all kinds of people who want no part of this mess that Donald Trump is creating.
Good point. Elaine Kmark, last word.
Okay. Presidents have policies. Absolutely correct. They deserve to get their policies heard, but their policies need to change law. Okay? We don't go from presidential policy to action if in fact there's law in between. And that's what you are asserting with the deep state. You're asserting that a president should be a king.
So if I may, you're saying, well, not even a
king.
king, you're saying an absolute monarch.
He's not an absolute monarch. Right. Absolutely not.
Well, and we've never in this country before
Right.
lived
I
under a president who
appreciate
knows
where
he's
you
above the
might
law.
all want to go with this.
Yeah.
Fantastic conversation. We're out of time. I'd like to thank you all for being with us. Elaine Kamark, Director of the Center for Effective Public Management at the Brookings Institution, Democratic strategist John Neffinger, and Republican strategist Adolfo Franco. Thank you all. This was a fantastic conversation. I don't think we solved it, but we're going to keep it this again. We'll have you all back. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Thank you.
And so what is the bottom line? When President Donald Trump came to Washington, it had the feel of a hostile takeover more than a smooth transition of government. His top advisor at the time, Steve Bannon, said that every day would be a battle for the deconstruction of the administrative state. And Donald Trump talks nonstop about the unholy alliance between Democrats, mainstream media, and government bureaucrats all conspiring against him. But in reality, he's no different than any other politician who gains sympathy by painting himself as a man of the people, fighting the powers that be. But Trump is the first to call his own government workers absolute scum, and that will have consequences for years. And that's the bottom line.